You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. That's right. This is the voice of atheism in Florida on the Tan Talk Radio Network, our website, talk.aof.ngo, and your opportunity to insult an atheist for only $2 if you pick up the phone and call in at 727-441-3000. Ed Golly with Joe Reinhardt and Jim Peterson in the Tan Talk studio. First, a local event you may find very enlightening if you live your life free of religious indoctrination or are even considering doing so. Jimmy, tell us about the upcoming Darwin Day event this month here in Clearwater.
You don't have to fear the lightning. It's Darwin Day 2019, and we'll be celebrating that particular occasion on March 16th at the UU Octagon on 2470 Nursery Road in Clearwater. If you go to the Tampa Bay Core.net website, you can buy your tickets right there. And this year it's going to feature Hemant Mehta, who is the editor of The Friendly Atheist and appears on the Atheist Voice channel on YouTube and co-hosts the Friendly Atheist podcast. He is a former national board certified high school math teacher, and he has written several books, one of which is I Sold My Soul on eBay and The Young Atheist Survival Guide. So, and we're also going to be featuring Ryan Kragen. Dr. Kragen is a leading authority on the sociology of religion. His research has been published widely, and he teaches at the University of Tampa and is widely appreciated as much that you don't need to find it's well worth it.
Well, as the nation lurches closer towards being ruled by a tyrannical dictator with unwavering support from the Republican Party, the American people are ignoring an even greater threat to their waning secular democracy, which is rule by tyrannical theocrats. The rise of theocrats in powerful positions of authority is particularly disconcerting because not only was America created as a secular nation with a secular constitution, but because the theocrat Trump has given that vicious minority another example of what they elected him to do in the first place. Another radical Christian extremist, the name of William Barr, in a powerful federal government position, the Attorney General, along with Betsy DeVos heading up the education department with the prime focus of dismantling public education and turning it over to the churches, specifically the Christian churches, and formerly Scott Pruitt in the Environmental Protection Agency, working vociferously to convert it to the Environmental Destruction Agency. Well, Jay Sessions was a legitimate threat to America's secular government as Trump's Attorney General, but his theocratic aspirations paled in comparison to Trump's latest theocratic cabinet member, a conservative Catholic malcontent who is unlikely to ever defend the U.S. Constitution simply because it is a secular document. It's noteworthy that Sessions only stated that, according to his mind, the separation of church and state in the Constitution is a concept that is unconstitutional. However, his replacement apparently believes that America's government is duty-bound to enforce God's law because there is no place for secularism. Well, with that, let's meet our guest on this week's Atheist Forum, Rabbi Merrill Shapiro of an organization called Americans United for Separation of Church and State, or quite simply, AU. Mr. Shapiro is the immediate past president of the National Board of Trustees of AU and has served as president of the Richmond, Virginia AU chapter. He's one of several plaintiffs in the case of Joanne McCall et al. Versus Rick Scott as governor et al. I should call him the criminal Rick Scott. And that was a challenge to the private school voucher program, specifically Florida's corporate tax credit scholarship scheme. Reverend Shapiro, welcome to the Atheist Forum, and thank you for taking your time to be with us today. I'd like to hear a little bit about that case.
Well, I'm delighted to be part of this. before we get to that case, can I plug Darwin Day at the
Please
Union
do.
Church? As a person of faith, I will tell you that Charles Darwin and the concept of evolution help people of faith see the hand of God in the world today. So it's not just an atheist issue. It's people of faith support Darwin as well.
Very good.
The legislature and the governor of the state of Florida, quite some time ago, created a Florida corporate tax scholarship scheme to do an end run of Brown Florida's Constitution. At first, Jeb Bush, as governor, sought to take funds directly from the state treasury, your tax dollars and mine, and send those funds off to religious schools to underwrite the cost of religious education. Now, that was found to be unconstitutional. Our Florida Constitution requires that, quote, no public money be taken from the public treasury, unquote, to support any sectarian or religious activities. And so what he did was found unconstitutional, aside from illogical, since tax-paying Baptists were supporting Presbyterian education. Presbyterians were supporting Muslim education. Seventh-day Adventists with their tax dollars were supporting Catholic education, and Catholics with their tax dollars were supporting Scientology education right here in the Tampa area, by the way. And so the once found to be unconstitutional, yet being desirous, our legislator and our governors being desirous of supporting religious schools, came up with a scheme. It was actually written by the American Legislative Exchange, ALEC, in Chicago, to do an end run by doing this. They passed a law, and it's still a law, and is funded to close to $1 billion a year down in Florida, in which a corporation, let's call the XYZ Widget Corporation, has to pay $100,000 of taxes to the state of Florida as part of a corporate tax. The XYZ Widget Corporation had the option of writing instead a $100,000 check to an organization called Step Up for Students, and Step Up for Students would then distribute that money as scholarships or as vouchers so that children could leave public schools and enter into private schools. 81% of the children in this program are attending, with our tax, with this tax credit, are attending religious schools. And so they are being funded actually with our tax dollars for, and I ask you and your listeners to underscore this issue, it's not well understood, even by our friends. When the XYZ Widget Corporation writes a $100,000 check to Step Up for Students that does not go to the state treasury, whom do you think makes up that $100,000 loss?
The public schools.
Yes. It's you and me. Yeah. We have to pay more in state taxes to underwrite the cost of that scholarship. And so we sued a group of us. Ms. McCall was the head of the Florida Education Association, the Association of School Superintendents, the PTAs were involved, the ACLU, the League of Women Voters. All of us sued to put a stop to this. And here's the diabolical genius of the program. When the courts heard it, they said, well, since you guys didn't write any checks, it really didn't cost you anything. And therefore, we don't even have to talk about the merits of the case. You have no standing. You're not affected by this at all. And they threw the case out, even though we argued tax credits do cost us. And so we are searching around for another avenue by which to shut this program down that funds nearly $1 billion of religious education in the state.
Rabbi Shapiro, if I may interrupt for just 1 second. In what way does the tax exemptions and tax benefits to religion that you just described, how does that vary from the fact that the citizens of the state of Florida are already paying for the police protection, the fire department, the sewerage, the roads, the sales tax, the ad valorem taxes for every religious institution in the state. And since they're already bellying up to the public trough and enjoying those benefits in spite of Article 1, Section 3 of the Florida Constitution, how does that differ from, I mean, since we're already paying for their police, why shouldn't we pay to indoctrinate their children too? Where does it stop, and why does it even start?
It starts, first of all, there are several issues. First of all, we do support religious institutions, along with all Internal Revenue Code Section 501c3 charitable organizations. So religious organizations are lumped in there with the Kidney Foundation, the Red Cross, Planned Parenthood. If you have an
Atheists
association
of Florida.
of thinkers or atheists, or the UU Church, they all get supported. And we commonly agree with that, although it could be problematic, and it has become problematic.
Well, of course it is, because just because you're tax exempt doesn't mean that you're religious. It only prohibits money to religious institutions, in other words, churches. And I can't think that there's an honest man in this state that thinks that not having to pay ad valorem taxes is not a transfer of money to religion.
Well, they may think that, but they speak quite a different line.
Lying for Jesus, we call it. Go ahead.
That?
Lying for Jesus, we call it.
Yeah, exactly. And to promote their religion. By the way, there are other religions that also want to belly up to the bar or to the trough.
All 10,000 of them.
Yeah, so it's not just Christians. It's the
no.
far right of lots of religions. And they want that money. By the way, one of the issues is that in their minds, public education is not working. In their minds, public education is a government entity, and the government can't do anything right, which is not true. And in their minds, the government schools, public schools, are hostile to religion, since public prayer and Bible reading have been stricken from the public schools. So they want to find and create a more friendly environment so that they can use schools for the purposes of promoting their religion.
Right. So as long as we pay for it, that's
you got it. By the way, on a somewhat disingenuous level, I'd love to have somebody else pay for, I'm a member of a synagogue, I pay dues. I'd love to have somebody else pay the dues for me. But there's some issues here, and that's what's most interesting. The far right is, of course, is that we all have to take personal responsibility. Well, if I join a house of worship, I want to take personal responsibility. They don't want personal. They want the government to take responsibility for it.
Do you think segregation has anything to do with this, though?
Okay, now we're talking about the nature of the private schools that receive these funds. Without a doubt, segregation is part of it, and secularism, segregation, and segregation by by socioeconomic status. Mm-hmm. So the vision was that this program will help fund poor kids who will go to fancy private schools where everybody's a member of the country club and everybody drops their kids off out of a Mercedes or Jaguar and so on. In the end, by the way, it hasn't worked out that way for them, but that's their image. Yes, they don't want to. I hate to say get their hands dirty by being a public schools, which are just for commoners.
Yeah, we have noted more than a few times on this program that the voucherization of the education system stems largely from the effort to avoid school segregation, especially starting in around the 1950s and 60s when these Christian academies started popping up as an alternative to public schools, so that white parents could avoid having to send their children to public schools where there are black children now integrated into the system. And so it just kind of grew from there. And one cannot help but to suppose that perhaps this is a strong motivation for many.
And there's a second motivation, but you are absolutely correct about the segregation element. But there's a second impetus here that falls on the shoulders of our legislators. The Florida State Constitution charges our legislators and our government with creating a single uniform system of high quality, free public education.
That's the wording.
Our legislators have failed in that, and they know they failed, and there are failing schools. They give schools grades, they fail schools. That's because the legislature continues to refuse to fund public education as it should be funded, and then turns around and says, oh, see, the school is failing. And of course it's failing because you haven't funded it, and therefore its children, let's send them all to private schools with taxpayer dollars.
I never understood the logic by which you would try to change the course of a failing school by depriving them of funds.
And not only that, and this relates to a survey that showed the people involved in this program are much more likely to have their children go on to college than the others. The truth is that what happens in public schools is if you can get a voucher to a private school and you're paying attention and interested in your child's education and you're bright and articulate, you avail yourself, you take your kid out of the public school and go. So who is left to advocate for our public schools?
Yeah.
Who's left to show up at school board meetings and yell and scream and jump up and down and say our teachers should be paid a fair wage for what they're doing, and what they're doing is a lot. Although the most inarticulate than people with less education, they're the ones who are left behind in public schools that have now increasingly been vacated by articulate, bright, and committed voices.
And there's going to be a terrible effect, one thinks, on the nature of our society as more and more children are deprived of an opportunity to mix it up, so to speak, of being in the company of others of different faiths and political points of view and culture and so on and so forth, race.
Right. I think these people are joining the major trend in our country, sadly, of dividing us, not uniting us.
Sure.
Notice that when you and I were growing up, I suspect, although you sound much younger,
I'm 74.
Our country's motto was "E pluribus unum." It was on our dollar bills.
Yes.
But out of many, we're going to create one. We're going to unite ourselves. Mm-hmm. That was removed as our motto, and the new motto is "In God We Trust," which is there to tell all the people who don't believe in God that, you're an outsider.
Yeah, and of course, the Native Americans didn't subscribe to that too well.
All others pay cash.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, let me express a caveat. You and I are dealing intellectually on this level. The people on the other side are dealing with it emotionally. And so you're being logical, and I encourage you to continue to be logical. But the people on the other side are being emotional, and they're not listening to the logic. And we can talk till we're blue in the face. And you're absolutely right. We're headed for trouble. A lot of divisiveness, stratification, classes. We're headed for trouble.
I think too, another foundation for this movement is it kind of parallels the George W. Bush effort to privatize Social Security. You have so much government money floating around there, and they want to get it into the hands of corporate entities and CEOs' pockets. The Florida school budget is enormous, and no corporations are able to take advantage of that. So by privatizing the school, the CEO can net a cool $5 million a year salary, and then have plenty of money to kick back into the politicians' coffers to keep that system running.
They already have the prison system as a paradigm.
I was just going to say. So let's take a look at two important dates in relatively recent, for me, again, an old guy, American history. One is January the 20th, 1961, and one is January the 20th, 1981. On January the 20th, 1961, newly elected and inaugurated President John F. Kennedy said, "Ask not what your country can do for
you, but ask what you can do for your country." I'll just take over. So we lost Merrill. Somebody whacked.
If you're listening, call back in again.
Yeah, we'll put you back on.
Hope you're listening.
The trouble that I think, though, that we're heading for in this issue is that as the courts get increasingly stacked with conservative judges, there's no recourse to fight it anymore. There's no way to bring up the constitutional issues that protect us from these movements which will parallel what we're going to be talking about with the Attorney General Barr, because that's the last line of defense. Same thing with the environment and women's issues and so on. That once the courts turn conservative, there's no place to go to get the protections anymore. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and that is a factor that is being rapidly accelerated, according to a news report just yesterday, that Trump is now concentrating on getting as many federal judges appointed as he possibly can. And of course, they're all going to be conservative,
Yes.
extremely conservative.
I am back. I apologize.
Ah, good to have you.
Welcome to the program.
Well,
Thanks.
again.
Good to be here.
okay, I tell you what, Mr. Rabbi Shapiro, we are going to take a short break here and tell our listeners about a local organization called Atheists of Florida. And then we'll be back to talk about the new Attorney General that we have. So if you'll just give us about a minute or so, we'll come back to you and continue here with the Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network, 2:29 on this Friday afternoon. Joe Reinhardt with us in the studio has our weekly quote of the week.
Yes, I do, Ed. And this week's quote is anonymous, which is to say it was seen on a bumper sticker. And it says, "Walk by faith, not by sight." Now,
Faith is one thing, but
yeah, that sounds good in the abstract, but I'd hate to try to cross US 19 in the middle of rush hour under that particular type of program. But worse than that would be to drive by faith rather than by sight. And of course, I sure don't want to get on an airplane where the pilot has that bumper sticker sticking on the
Scotch tape the inside of the window.
Well, this is in
to the
fact
door to the cockpit. Yeah.
This is in fact becoming a possibility. However, when you look at all of the AI guided driverless cars that are supposedly coming at us in the future.
Well, that's
But
a
in that
different
case,
kind of faith.
That's right. We're having faith in technology. That is confidence that the technology will work. And most of the time it does, as we've experienced. People complain when it doesn't, but it doesn't happen.
It doesn't hurt for long when it doesn't work.
Yeah, pain is short. Yeah.
A fellow named Charles Darwin drew his conclusions on science and the scientific method. We still revere the guy to this day for what he did and the changes he made in the annals of the human experience. And
That's right.
to celebrate that, Jim, we're going to have an event called Darwin Day coming up.
Yes, once again, in the International Darwin Day Foundation is celebrating, as it does every year, the life and contributions of Charles Darwin to science and humanity. And we're doing it here on March 16th at 10 o'clock at the UU Octagon on Nursery Road in Clearwater. You can get your tickets at the TampaBayCore.net. And so just go right there. And I think you'll have a really good time. I've mentioned before, we're having Hemant Mehta and Ryan Kragen, two very distinguished people who are also quite funny and interesting on their own. We hope that you'll come down and find out that science is always under challenge by religious extremists, but that it is possible to overcome those challenges with rationality, logic, reason, and science.
And a gun.
No.
Joining us on the Atheist Forum today is Rabbi
recommend
Merrill Shapiro of an organization called Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And Rabbi Shapiro, if you'd like to tell our audience a little bit about that organization and what they do and how they might contact the organization or find out more about it, I'm
Sure.
going to give you the few minutes to tell us about that.
With pleasure. Americans United for Separation of Church and State was founded in 1947 and is the primary organization that fights for the separation of church and state, a very conservative value held by our founders, despite what revisionist historians say, held by our founders that church and state should remain separate. And so what makes us unique and different from other organizations is that, as I am, many of our leadership are members of clergy or people of faith. We know, of course, that secularists, atheists, agnostics, freethinkers of all, humanists, and freethinkers of all ilk are opposed to the government trying to change us into a theocracy. But there are lots of people of faith who also are raising their voices through Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and are also saying we are a democracy, not a theocracy. The best place to find us is at www.au.org, or you can Google Americans United for Separation of Church and State. We have an office in Washington. We have presence in 37 states around the country, chapters. There's a chapter in the Tampa Bay area, in Sarasota, and on the west coast of Florida. And we are working very hard, and we need everyone's voice to speak out against bills in the current Florida legislature, bills to defund public schools in favor of private religious schools, bills to require Bible education in our schools, bills to protect partisan religious prayer in public government settings. We need lots of voices.
I have to say that we would definitely favor recognizing and saluting all those people of faith who see the value of establishing that religion is a primary personal freedom, like freedom of speech or assembly or all the rest of them. So it's not something that belongs to a church, it's something that belongs to each one of us.
And let me hasten to add that religious people have the right to their own personal religion.
Indeed.
And people also have a strong right not to have any religion at all. It's okay.
AU has always been, since its inception, has always been heavily supported by the Baptists.
By the way, the name was at one time thought to be Baptist United for Separation of Church and State, and it was Protestants United for Separation of Church and State. Seventh-day Adventists, by the way, early on were opposed to blue laws. They had to close their shops on Sundays in lots of places, and of course their Sabbath, like Jews, it was on Saturday, and so they lost 2 days worth of business, and it's not the role of the government to tell us when we can open or close.
But it's nice to know that the resistance to the religious insurgency is interfaith and far more widespread than most people realize on the surface.
We need religious people. There can be no doubt to defend their own freedom of religion.
We need all of us, people of faith and people who choose not to be of faith.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, in a 1995 essay, our new Attorney General, William Barr, expressed the extremist Christian view that, quote, American government should not be secular, unquote. Secularism is an abomination in Barr's theocratic mind, despite the fact that the law of the land is unmistakably secular, as defined in the First Amendment. Furthermore, Barr contends America's government is supposed to be imposing, quote, a transcendent moral order with objective standards of right and wrong that flows from God's eternal law, unquote. Eternal law best dictated by the Vatican and taught in public schools as taxpayers' expense. This should stand the hair up on the back of every American who understands the Constitution and the fact that what our First Amendment guarantees us is freedom of religion. And we only can attain that when the government is completely neutral with respect to that. Well, here we have an attorney general now who wants to impose his perception of it on the land, with the courts increasingly becoming very right-leaning, conservative-leaning, to tell us that their interpretation of the Constitution is this is perfectly legal.
Right, and that's why everyone's voice is so important. We're going to find less and less satisfaction going to courts that are populated by judges that have been put in place by theocrats like William Barr or like our governors of late, and we're not going to get any satisfaction. So William Barr and his point of view, we feel, flows from activities of the Congressional Prayer Caucus in Washington. The Congressional Prayer Caucus has put together a project called Project Blitz.
Oh, yes, we've talked about that.
Project Blitz's
Ralph
job.
Drollinger.
Yeah, that Project Blitz's job in their mind is to bring moral religious teaching to destroy secularism in our country, where secularists are the enemy, and to install a religious theocracy. And they're succeeding, and unfortunately are reinforced in the success. So last year, State Senator Kim Daniels, State Representative, I think she's a senator, Kim Daniels of Jacksonville, entered a bill that passed the legislature, and every school room, and I understand every office and every public building, supposedly in the state of Florida, has to have a sign that says in the front, "In God We Trust." And now Representative Daniels, or Senator Daniels, has entered a bill that's worrisome. It passed the Education Committee in the past 24 hours that says every school must provide an elective of Bible education. House Bill 195. And you and I are going to wind up paying for Bible education that's supposed to be secular, but it's not a secular book. And who can teach it neutrally? It just won't work. But we're going to see more and more of these laws because of Project Blitz that has brought William Barr back into the Office of Attorney General.
And then they're basing it on the free exercise clause, right? Which is just totally convoluted.
Well, you know what the majority has discovered is playing an oppressed minority victim. Oh, we're being victimized by these seculars. Oh, we're being prosecuted and stepped
we're
on.
going to do $1 trillion a year.
Don't tread on me. You know, atheists and anti-theocrats and Democrats, because we want democracy, not because of our party. You're treading on us like treading on the snake. Don't tread on me. We want to stand up. And so they have turned things on their head and said, we're a victim because we can't stand up in your child's public school and ask people to come to accept Jesus Christ as their personal savior.
That particular card has been played many times throughout history and has always ended badly, shall we say. So we've got to get people educated, concerned, and looking at history as a source of understanding what this thing is, this Project Blitz and Christian hegemony and all the rest of it, that it poses a genuine threat to our secular democracy as we have known it and all the freedoms that we enjoy.
Yeah, so that your right to refuse to bake a cake, if you're a baker, to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding is not part of your freedom of expression of religion protected by the First Amendment.
Yeah, I thought
your decision not to make that cake is your meanness and underscores exactly what your religion does not want to teach.
I thought we settled this issue with the Pickwick restaurant and Lester Maddox when he stood there with his axe handle, and that was the end of it. But clearly, it's not. They never give up.
In a few weeks, Jews will begin preparing for Passover, and we say in every generation there arose people to get us. And I would say of the people of America associated with Americans United for Separation of Church and State and our many, many allies, in every generation, we think we're going to win, and we're going to change America, and theocracy will not be a question. And in every generation, there arise more and more voices on the other side. It's a little like playing whack-a-mole. We get them one place, and they pop up at another place.
Mm-hmm.
They're always going to be there. And as Jefferson said, to avoid that kind of tyranny, it takes eternal vigilance.
Yeah, I think that's the real danger, not so much the oppression that any kind of theocracy levies on its citizenship, but the competition that once one particular religion gains the upper hand, the other 10,000, which there are 10,000 different religions on the planet right at the moment, the competition will become so keen, and since everyone's so devoted and committed, we'll be right back to what the forefathers dreaded from day one, which is 100 years of war, or who knows what kind of religious conflicts will cause chaos and civil war and collapse, not from tyranny, but just from total internecine aggression.
Right. And so William Barr, along with revisionist historians like David Barton, will turn things on their head and say, oh no, our nation was founded on Christian principles, and religion was a part of our founding from the very beginning, and George Washington prayed, and Thomas Jefferson said, so help me God at the end of it. It's all false. They make it up. And because people on the other side are not critical thinkers, they swallow that whole, when in my mind it's a simple violation of the commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness.
But for that moment, when we lost your phone connection, what I was suggesting is that we have always had the court system to defend us from these people. The environmentalists had the courts to help protect the environment. And now that we see both our Florida state court and our federal Supreme Court leaning so heavily to the right, their interpretation of the Constitution is going to be that the agenda of Project Blitz is perfectly constitutional.
Absolutely.
So what defense do we have anymore?
You know what? To a certain extent, by the way, the first line of defense is education. I am and I won't put you on the spot and ask you to name your state senator and state representative and how to get in touch with your U.S. Congress representative.
Well, we can do that anyway.
However, so many of us do not. And so many of us swallow these stories that we hear from the other side as made of whole cloth, and they're untrue. We also need to recognize, as we have several members of the National Board of Trustees, Eddie Tabash might be a name familiar to
been on our show.
Yes, who says that the most important thing that we are voting for when voting for a president is not their foreign policy.
It's the judges, right?
It is who they're going to put, because those people, and we see it now, are going to sit on the court long after the president and all the rest of us are gone. There's going to be a court with right-wingers who call abortion murder and who on one side say the government shouldn't be involved in our personal lives, and on the other side want the government to determine the definition of life and what constitutes religion and so on. Yeah.
And even when the pendulum swings the other way and we are able to start appointing more liberal judges again, they'll be hamstrung by the stare decisis and by having to rely on other previous decisions from the court. It's very difficult to overturn by 180 degrees previous decisions, and it's very rare for the court to do that, even though they are opposed to that ethos. It's hard to overcome the existing law. So it'll go on even longer because liberal judges will be bound by prior decisions.
Okay, so I agree with you, but I hate to be so cynical and so pessimistic. So let's point out that the government has three branches. We may have, our voices may be heard by the executive branch. Our voices, yes, as you point out, will not be heard by the judicial branch. But it's the legislative branch, those legislators whom we barely know their names, who serve us in Tallahassee and then in U.S. Congress. there that we need to cry out loudly and strongly and support organizations. AU has a somewhat significant, or certainly very effective, lobbying arm that we go and explain things and educate to legislators in Washington, D.C. and around the country. And we need to become educated, and then we need to educate others.
Speaking of which, you may have noticed that just yesterday, the House of Representatives passed a law in which they stated their opposition to hate in all of its forms: anti-Semitism, anti-Islam, so on and so forth. What is your opinion of this development?
That's fine, but they also didn't pass then that we don't want hate on the basis of race. We don't want hate on the basis of national origin. There are lots of reasons why people, quote unquote, hate each other.
Yes.
So as far as it went, it was fine. It needs to go further.
Yes,
and
it does.
27 Republicans voted against it.
You know,
which is encouraging.
I wonder, though, if the courts are going to fail to protect us, maybe the divisiveness of religion itself may do it. Here's a quote from William Barr. Quote, "We live in an increasingly militant secular age. As part of this philosophy, we see a growing hostility toward religion, particularly Catholicism. This form of bigotry has always been fashionable in the United States. There are today even greater efforts to marginalize or ghettoize Orthodox religion." Well, he essentially wants the Vatican to be running our country. And of course, he's going to run into an obstacle from the Baptists and the Methodists and the Presbyterians. And so, you know, when they go too far to try to theocratize the country, they're always going to get pushback from those who don't fall into their particular category of religion.
Right.
The best way to get rid of a bad law is enforce it.
Yeah, in a way, yes. By the way, again, the two schools in the Tampa area who are receiving government dollars to teach Scientology that's protected by the first, but they're receiving public funds. That's not protected, but they actually are helping us, because we can go to the Catholics, to the Protestants, to people of other religion, and says, "See what this bill is doing? How are you? You know, it's crazy, and this is not the way to go." But again,
Sure.
we talk to them and we speak logically. They're not thinking logically; they're thinking emotionally.
Sure. And that goes back to the foundation of Americans United, right? A religious
Right,
organization that is strongly advocating keeping religion out of government and state-church separation, so that true freedom of religious expression exists in the country.
No man should have to pay for another man's religion, period.
Exactly. There's no
What I
question
see him
about
doing
that.
is creating this sort of artificial war on religion and, what do they call it here? Circled it somewhere. The free, what do they call it? Freedom of religion, the free exercise clause.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So they frame it sort of like, what's his name? Bill O'Reilly used to, every year he'd tell us there's this war on Christmas, and there isn't any such thing. And they're kind of following that same playbook, saying there's this war on religion and Christianity and the free exercise clause, and unless the government funds it all, we are trying to put it out of business, which isn't true at all.
Well, as you've remarked before, though, it's always the case of the oppressor playing the role of the oppressed.
Yes.
I mean, what a dandy way to get people
And
back
so
to
in
pay
response,
attention.
by the way, several years ago, Representative Gary Siplin from Apopka entered a bill that we fought against and lost that made Merry Christmas the official state greeting for the month of December in the state of
It's
Florida.
unbelievable.
Now, you know what? We have people who need health care. We have climate change.
Failing
those things
schools.
aren't important.
Our shorelines are washing away. So we have to have our legislators worry about what the Merry Christmas will be part of the answer to the so-called imaginary war on Christmas. It's crazy.
Sometimes
It's
all you
really-
can say is just Christ.
Yes.
They certainly won't be having a happy new year if they pursue that.
Well,
That's right.
you know what? Unfortunately, they are winning here and winning a little there, and they keep at it, and they are well organized, and our side is not. And we need to unite our voices and proclaim loudly that we are living in a country and in a state that protects the separation of church and state, and that protects the church from the state intrusion, and protects the state from church intrusion.
Mhm.
And we need to stand guard on that wall that was first articulated by Thomas Jefferson.
All of the minority religions and atheism, humanism, all the secular interests that are at play here have every reason to come together on certain issues, such as the one we just spent the afternoon discussing.
You know what? Thank you. You remind me that if you go to the www.au.org, the American Zion website, there's a place to report a violation. So that if you go to a governmental meeting and there's an invocation in the name of Jesus Christ, there's people, it doesn't like me saying this, you click on that box and to enter a description of what you saw that made you feel like a second-class citizen because you don't believe like the majority. And a little bell rings on an attorney by the name of Ian Smith's desk in Washington, D.C., and he'll fire off a law letter that in some cases has begun a lawsuit to put a stop to this business of making the rest of us feel like we're second-class citizens.
And after that, you can contact AOF, and we will pursue a similar course working with AU.
By the way, we all this case in Bladens, the cross in Bladensburg.
Oh, man.
Yes,
Maryland.
AHA is pursuing that.
The Humanist Society, the Freedom for Religion, Americans United for Separation Church, all of us are lined up and united with one voice. And it's the same with the protests against Project Blitz. There are 47 organizations, including the American Humanist Association, that are all lined up against this. And if we unite our voices and they hear us loudly, we hope to make some headway.
And we will.
Yeah, and of course, our adulterer in chief, I think, is really playing to the religious right because that's the only real base that he has and the only chance that he has of trying to get reelected, that and whatever help he can get from the Russians. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just in fact, it's so hypocritical, we've invented a new word for it. It's hypocrisy on steroids. We can call it hyperocracy.
Yeah. And if you can explain to me how, yes, the adulterer in chief, to whom the commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness, means anything. What does the Washington Post have him up to over 8,000 lies? And why does he have the support of people of faith? And the answer is not in the world of logic that you and I understand. The answer is, I don't know where.
God has picked him, and even Trump doesn't realize that God is using him to bring about whatever God's purpose for all of us.
Yeah.
It ought to be perfectly clear.
Yeah.
Right. We have a lot of work to do. We cannot be silent. We cannot be made to feel like we're second-class citizens because we don't believe the way the majority does. And if we are silent, we will get what we deserve. So we need to speak up. We need to know that programs like this and groups of atheists and lots of organizations with faith people involved as well need to stand up for the fundamental conservative values that are ensconced not in the Second Amendment or the Third or the Fifth or the 19th, in the very First Amendment and its first clause, that there will be no establishment of religion, and then later, of course, protecting free exercise. But these people want to establish Christianity as our state religion, and we cannot allow it to happen.
We only have a couple minutes left. Are there any other primary or predominant issues that Americans United is concerned with that you want to tell us about?
We are particularly concerned with attempts in various. We started out with the Florida Corporate Tax Scholarship Scheme. Then, of course, the when you register a car now in the state of Florida, you can elect to have $50 of your money go to support kids who have been bullied in public school. And by the way, if they say they're bullied, you can't question whether that's legitimate or not. They go, and so we give them money to go off to largely religious schools. And now there are other schemes to take public money to fund religious education, and we need to stand up. That's just here in the state of Florida. On a national level, invocations, well, even on a local level, invocations in city councils, invocations in the Board of Education meetings, invocations in zoning commission meetings, and so on, can not be recited by a person who's working for the government. Everybody in the room cannot be asked to stand. Everybody cannot be asked to bow their heads. And we need to report these things and make sure that the other side knows.
Well, I can tell you that as a representative of AOF, we were able to deliver an invocation just last night from the city of Clearwater.
Good. That's wonderful. By the way, that's being done in Jacksonville. I think we need to all work together to make sure that we're reinforcing one another, and that smaller towns other than Tampa and Jacksonville and Clearwater and so on, St. Petersburg, that smaller towns can do that as well.
Down to just a few seconds left, Reverend Merrill Shapiro from Americans United. Tell once again how our listeners can find out more about Americans United.
Thank you. The easiest way, again, is to go to www.americansunited.org, or to Google us, or to look for us. The address actually is 1310 L Street Northwest in Suite 200 in Washington, D.C.
Thanks.
2005.
Thank you again. We'll be
Rabbi,
back next
thank you
week.
very much.
Join us again next week on the Atheist Forum on the Tan Talk Radio Network. The Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. And join us again next Friday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.